We spoke earlier about spousal support for men, but what happens when it comes to custody of children in the event of a divorce? Well, back with us we have from Buckley Le Chevalier, Attorney Jay Taylor. It is interesting because it's, you know, there's an old way of thinking and there's the new world.
That's right.
So how do courts choose who's a primary custodial parent in today's marriages?
There's a long series of things that the judge has to consider. Including who's been the primary caregiver, and this ties into our conversation earlier about who's the stay-at-home parent. The primary caregiver is the person whose primary responsibility in the marriage is raising the kids, getting them to school, packing their lunches, taking them to the pediatrician, taking them to the dentist, picking them up after school, all of those kinds of things.
But in a lot of contemporary marriages, parents really pull double duty. They really split that down the middle. You know, a dad's taking kids to sports, and a mom's doing that, and dads are getting them off to school. Or I mean, a lot of that duty is split now too.
That's right, and there are a number of other things the courts will look at. They want to know who are the children primarily bonded with. They want to protect that bond.
How do they find that out? Because
they put a kid in each corner, and then they have the parents stand in the middle and they call them.
How do they?
No?
I hope not.
Do they do an investigation into who the kids are primarily bonded with?
It's an expensive investigation,
Yeah.
but one of the things couples sometimes do is they will hire a child psychologist to come in, and that psychologist will test both parents. They do these written tests to see if anybody has a personality disorder, any mental health issues. They will interview family members. They'll talk to the kids if they're old enough. And they'll watch the parent with the kids. So a parent who can get down on the floor with their 5-year-old and play games and also correct that child if he or she misbehaves is demonstrating good parenting skills, where the parent who is kind of glued to the evaluator while the child is misbehaving is probably demonstrating poor skills.
I would imagine a lot of times in custody disputes, it's really not about the children, but it's about hurting the other marriage partner.
Yeah, I believe really that there are still some big gender differences. The courts are not allowed to consider gender in figuring out who's going to get custody. So we have lots of dads now getting custody of little girls and little boys and older children. But really, women still have more of a personal stigma if they lose custody of their children. And women will fight hard to hang on to their kids, even if they feel that they're maybe not the best parent. It's hard. It's a little bit harder, I think, for women to look at themselves in the eye and say, you know, I'm a career girl. He's a good parent. Well, you know, I'll settle for every other weekend parenting time.
Is 50-50 more when it comes to splitting up children? That's more common now, isn't it? As opposed to one primary caregiver and the other parent getting the kids on weekends.
Exactly. There's been a lot of research about how important it is to let kids continue to have a strong relationship with both parents. And so unless one parent is really dangerous or dysfunctional, the courts are going to try to give both parents a lot of parenting time. If not 50-50, then 40-60, something close to that.
So couples who maybe have a marriage that's fallen apart, what should they be thinking about individually when it comes to custody of children, getting ready for these kind of challenges? A psychology test sounds intimidating, you know, the considerations of the court. So what should they be thinking about?
Well, first of all, make sure that you're really involved in your children's lives, whether you're working or not. Make sure that you do know who their pediatrician is and that you've been to the doctor's office with them and you know their teachers and you know their best friends. And another very important thing is make sure that you're not going to get caught actively undermining the other parent's relationship, because the court literally has to decide which parent is going to be more supportive of the child's relationship with the other parent. So what we often see are parents who are zinging these hateful emails back and forth to each other, criticizing each other in front of the kids, grandparents coming in right in front of children saying, you know, your dad is a terrible human being. And you can lose custody of your kids if they can show that you are trying to undermine that relationship.
What about the employment of the parents? What if do they consider schedules and jobs and those sort of things as well?
Sure. I mean, everybody needs to get through a divorce without going through bankruptcy if it's at all possible, to hang on to as much as you can. It's an expensive process. So the courts are going to try to schedule parenting time so that it doesn't interfere with job opportunities and job hunting.
But I mean, as a primary custodial parent, if you're a dad but you work overnights, that may not be the right situation for raising children.
That's right.
So the courts will look at that as well?
They absolutely will.
And do women kind of need a little reality check about who's going to get what? Oftentimes I've heard female friends say, well, I'll keep the house and then that way I'll keep the kids. And like, that doesn't happen anymore, does it? I mean, as you mentioned, judges don't consider gender.
They can't consider gender. They will consider the children every opportunity they can. So sometimes they want to keep the kids in the family residence a little bit longer to help them adjust to the divorce. But really, keeping the family home is kind of a knee-jerk reaction a lot of people have to a divorce. I've lost my spouse, but by golly, I'm going to hang on to my house.
Right.
It's not always a good idea. Because you can't, and I see a lot of women get into this problem.
Right, they seem to think they're just going to automatically keep the home, and that's not really the case.
Well, and maybe they shouldn't, because they're going to find 2 years from now that their next boyfriend or their next husband doesn't necessarily want to live in that old house with them.
Right.
They have to mow the lawn and pay all the bills and pay the mortgage and keep up the house all by themselves, so the house might decline in value.
And not to mention, a lot of couples, their net worth is tied up in that home, and if you're getting a divorce and somebody's starting over, they need some assets too, right?
So it's a hard choice to make, but it's important to think about the business end of that decision.
You know, as we talk about all this, it just reinforces in me, make sure you marry somebody that you're going to stay with for the rest of your life, because it's just much easier that way, isn't it?
Yeah, but it takes two to stick together.
Oh boy, doesn't it? And thank God my wife works harder at this than I do. I'm telling you.
If you'd like to find out more, you can contact Buckley Le Chevalier at 503-620-8900, and we'll put the information on our website at k2.com. Thank you so much.
Good to talk to you.
Thank you.